I'm Phil Bolton with the Global Atlanta News Service. I'm in Savannah at the Southeast U.S. Canadian Provinces Alliance Conference, a conference that was set in motion by Georgia's Governor Sonny Perdue and also Premier of Quebec, Jean Charest. Thank you, Mr. Charest, for joining us. There's been a lot of talk about the need for bold initiatives in the relationship between the Southeast and Canada. We consider this such a relationship. What is it going to take to keep it alive?
Commitment on behalf of the governors and premiers to sustain the relationship and follow through with next year's meeting and the meeting after that, and to make this a bigger event for the next few years at least. This is really the first full meeting. The founding meeting was in Montreal, but this is the first really full meeting with business delegations on all sides. So next year's meeting will be important, and the 2 or 3 ones after that will be critical in determining whether this new alliance will survive.
In the comments earlier at this conference of former Ambassador Gordon Giffin, he mentioned the need to really raise the profile of the relationship between Quebec, the rest of the provinces, and the Southeast U.S. Yet in our recollection, we remember when Canadian companies would come to the Southeast, and they wouldn't make much of an effort to say they were Canadian. They preferred just to be recognized for their capabilities. Do you think it's time for a change?
Well, I think it is time for us to recognize the importance of the relationship. And in an election year here in the United States, where some people are questioning the trade relationships that the United States have, it is a timely opportunity for us to speak to the fact that this trade relationship between Canada and the United States is extremely important for both countries. We are each other's biggest trading partners. It's a good deal. Our economies are similar. We have the same environmental rules, same labor rules. It's not as though we're at any marked advantage or disadvantage over each other. And yet we tend to ignore the fact that we are each other's most important customers, and that the trade deal that we've had, the Free Trade Agreement of 1988, followed by NAFTA, has produced thousands and thousands of jobs on both sides of the border. So now's a good time to talk about that, and where we should be going in the future. Where is it that this relationship should go is the big question.
How did you feel about his comments concerning Mexico? He says it takes 2 to tango. The relations between the U.S. and Canada are not cookie cutter with those of Mexico. Were you surprised by his comments?
No, well, I'm not. In fact, NAFTA was the first trade deal in the world that included a developing country. That was one of the original characteristics of NAFTA, is to have 2 developed countries joined by a developing country in a trade agreement. That's not the story of Europe, of course. There are poorer countries, richer countries in Europe, but not a developing country, and that is unusual. And yet what I have witnessed and what we have witnessed is an elevation of the standard of life in Mexico, and a net increase in the middle class of consumers, and Mexico is 100 million people who are going to buy the goods that we make in Canada and the United States. And in that respect, I don't want to lose that. Now, what the ambassador is saying is that if we don't have to make every issue a trilateral issue. There are border issues between Canada and the United States that we should be able to address rapidly, effectively, and I agree with him on that. On all the border issues, Mr. Bolton, we're all very concerned about what we call in Canada the thickening of the border around security, around the flow of goods. That's an urgent issue that both countries need to sit down and work out if we're going to maintain this trade relationship.
Your province has Montreal as a thriving city, and yet it's got rural areas as well that are struggling. How does NAFTA resonate throughout Quebec?
It resonates very positively. And for a pretty simple reason, I think there's a pretty good understanding that we're 7.7 million people in Quebec. We have a small market, and if we want to prosper, we have to trade. A good example is the lumber industry and everything that has to do with forest products, which is a big part of our economy in the outlying regions, and suffering a lot right now because of the downturn in the American economy, because of environmental issues, the accessibility to forest, for example. And the people in the outlying regions make that connection. They understand very directly that the lack of jobs in the outlying regions is connected to the slowdown of the American economy here. So it's
Do you think the thickening borders is part of that problem? I know that there's...
Yes, I think it is part of the problem, and our ability to address that issue is going to be a key test of our relationship in the next few years. We have to be able to address the security imperative and do it effectively. So, you know, just square the circle. That's all we have to do, I guess.
In terms of the U.S. election, do you fear that NAFTA will continue to be this football?
Yes, we do. We follow the American election very closely, by the way, and which is very typical. If you're a smaller country and you're very dependent, you know, we're, you know, almost 50% of our gross domestic product, which our economy depends on exports, and 85% of that goes to the United States. So we know that, and so we pay attention. We're the smaller partner in this relationship, and it's a ratio of 1 to 10. The United States and Canada. If you keep that in mind on population base, on economy, it's always 1 to 10. So we watch what happens. We listen. We pay a lot of attention to it because our interest is at stake. And we're very concerned when we hear American politicians question NAFTA and the future of NAFTA and of these trade relationships, because our vital interest is at stake. And for that reason, we need to talk about it. We need to be here to talk about what NAFTA has been about. For example, very few Americans know that there are 7 million jobs in the United States that are directly related to trade with Canada. 7 million jobs. And that we've been able to double the trade between Canada, the United States, and Mexico since we've signed the NAFTA agreement. So we need to make that case. And hopefully the political leaders here will, I think, do the right thing.
Canada's economy overall is in fairly good shape. Yeah. Your currency is stronger than it has been. You have tremendous energy resources. How do you see these benefits as positioning yourself in the next couple of years?
Well, we have a good story to tell because first of all, we've got our own public finances in order. Canada, its provincial and federal governments ran up big deficits for a long time. We are not running deficits, neither the federal government or any of the provincial governments. None of us are, and we're running surpluses in certain cases. We've reduced the ratio of debt relative to the GDP. We're running a trade surplus. We have a knowledge-based economy. In Montreal, where I'm from in Quebec, the aeronautical industry, we're the 3rd biggest hub in the world. The pharmaceutical industry is doing very well. Biotechs, information technology, multimedia. It's a very modern economy, and yet there are a lot of resources. The energy area is doing extremely well. There's oil and gas in Western Canada. Where I'm from in Quebec, we are the 4th biggest producer of hydroelectricity in the world. Alone, Quebec alone. We're into wind power. And so, and the mining sector is booming in Quebec and in Canada. So we have a pretty good balance. Our dollar now is a lot stronger relative to the greenback because your dollar is weaker. And that has hurt our manufacturing sector a lot. But there are advantages to that also.